On the evening of June 7, 2021, in the quiet sprawl of Islandton, South Carolina, a 911 call shattered the silence of Moselle Road. Alex Murdaugh, his voice trembling, reported finding his wife Maggie and 22-year-old son Paul brutally gunned down near the dog kennels of their 1,700-acre hunting estate. The bodies lay in pools of blood, executed with different weapons, a scene so horrific it would soon captivate a nation. But this wasn't just any family tragedy. The Murdaughs weren't just any family. For over 100, the Murdaugh name had been synonymous with power, prestige, and the law itself in South Carolina's Lowcountry. 4 generations had built an unparalleled legal dynasty that shaped justice in this remote corner of America. In the chapters ahead, we'll unravel how this shocking double homicide exposed a complex web of deception spanning decades. We'll examine how a family that once dispensed justice became entangled in a spiral of alleged crimes, including fraud, addiction, and murder. This is the story of how an American legal dynasty crumbled from within, revealing that sometimes the most dangerous threats to justice hide behind its very banner. To understand the gravity of the Murdaugh murders, one must first comprehend the extraordinary dynasty from which Alex Murdaugh descended. For nearly a century, the Murdaugh family didn't just practice law in Hampton County and the surrounding Lowcountry region. They were the law. The dynasty began in 1920 with Randolph Murdaugh Sr., who established himself as the 14th Circuit Solicitor, essentially the chief prosecutor for a vast 5-county region spanning 2,400 square miles of South Carolina's southern coast. When he died in a train accident in 1940, his son, Randolph Murdaugh II, seamlessly stepped into the role. And when the second Randolph retired in 1986, his son, Randolph Murdaugh III, continued the family tradition. 86 years, 3 generations, 1 office, 1 family. This unprecedented concentration of prosecutorial power led locals to refer to the region simply as Murdaugh Country. As former South Carolina Attorney General Charlie Condon noted in a 2019 interview, the Murdaugh family wielded the kind of influence that's almost unimaginable in modern American jurisprudence. They determined who would be charged, what the charges would be, and often by extension, how justice would play out. The family simultaneously operated a personal injury law firm that became one of the most lucrative in the state. Founded in 1910 by Randolph Sr., the firm, eventually named Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Elsroth, and Dietrich, specialized in suing railroads and later other large corporations. The dual positioning of family members as both prosecutors and civil litigators created an intricate web of influence unmatched in modern legal circles. If you lived in the 14th Circuit and got on the wrong side of a Murdaugh, God help you, explained Hampton County historian Margaret Rivers. And if you were fortunate enough to have them representing your interests, doors magically opened. It wasn't corruption in the traditional sense. It was something more profound, more institutional. The family's influence extended beyond the courtroom into every aspect of local life. They donated generously to political campaigns, controlled key appointments, and maintained close relationships with law enforcement, judges, and community leaders. Their annual Labor Day cookout was the social event of the season, drawing hundreds of the region's most influential citizens. In 2006, the direct prosecutorial lineage ended when Randolph III stepped down, but the family's shadow over the legal landscape remained intact. By then, Alex Murdaugh, great-grandson of the dynasty's founder, was poised to continue the family's legacy, but in ways that would ultimately bring their century of dominance to a spectacular end. Alex Murdaugh embodied the future of the Murdaugh dynasty, the 4th generation poised to extend the family's influence well into the 21st century. Born into privilege in 1968, Richard Alexander Alex Murdaugh grew up understanding the weight of his surname and the expectations that came with it. Unlike his father and grandfathers, Alex chose not to pursue the solicitor's office, instead focusing on building the family's civil litigation practice. As a partner at Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Elsroth, and Dietrich, he specialized in personal injury cases, becoming known for securing multi-million-dollar verdicts and settlements. Alex could charm a jury like nobody else, remarked Curtis Bethia, a longtime Hampton County court clerk. When he walked into a courtroom, he owned it. Not through intimidation, but through this easy confidence that made everyone, from the bailiff to the judge, feel like they were in on something special. By all outward appearances, Alex represented Southern success. He married his college sweetheart, Margaret Maggie Kennedy Branstetter, and they raised 2 sons, Buster and Paul, in a life of hunting clubs, boat outings, and private schools. Their 1,700-acre property, known as Moselle, straddled Hampton and Colleton counties, a sprawling testament to the family's prosperity. The Post and Courier described him in 2019 as Hampton County's version of legal royalty, while others in the community referred to him simply as one of the good Murdaughs, a telling distinction that hinted at complicated undercurrents. Alex was always the first to offer help, said Pastor Thomas Wilson of Hampton Methodist Church. When the youth group needed funds for a mission trip, when someone's medical bills were overwhelming, Alex would quietly write checks without wanting recognition. His professional reputation seemed equally sterling. If you had a serious accident in the Lowcountry, you wanted Alex Murdaugh on your side, explained Columbia attorney Stephanie Coleman. His reputation for tenacity on behalf of clients was legendary. Yet there were whispers. Some defense attorneys privately complained about the preferential treatment Alex seemed to receive in local courts. Others noted his unusually close relationship with law enforcement officials, relationships that would later come under intense scrutiny. What nobody questioned, however, was Alex's position as the standard-bearer for the most powerful family in the Lowcountry, until the events of June 2021 began peeling back layers of a life far more complicated than anyone had imagined. In the Lowcountry of South Carolina, the Murdaugh name functioned as more than just a family identifier. It was an institution, a power structure that shaped the very fabric of justice itself. For nearly a century, the family's influence permeated every aspect of the legal system, from who got charged to how cases were prosecuted, and ultimately, who went to prison. Dr. Elizabeth Connor, a sociologist who studies power dynamics in rural communities, explains the phenomenon. What we saw with the Murdaughs represents a textbook case of what sociologists call concentrated power networks. When a single family controls the prosecutorial function across generations, they don't just enforce the law, they effectively become the law. The implications of this concentration of power extended far beyond the courthouse. Local businesses cultivated relationships with family members, knowing that staying in the Murdaughs' good graces could be essential for survival. Law enforcement officers understood that their careers could flourish or falter based on their allegiance to what many called the Murdaugh way of doing things. This dynastic influence created what psychologists term a culture of impunity. When 3 generations serve as the top law enforcement official, the boundaries between proper and improper conduct can blur. The family operated with a sense of entitlement that few dared to challenge. In small communities like Hampton County, power becomes particularly concentrated because there are fewer competing institutions, noted criminal justice professor Raymond Garfield. The Murdaughs weren't just influential, they were kingmakers who determined who else could hold power. The psychological impact on the family itself may have been equally profound. Fourth-generation members like Alex grew up in an environment where their actions rarely had consequences. When your grandfather and father have prosecutorial discretion, when your family name adorns the region's most prominent law firm, the normal rules that govern society can seem optional. Court records revealed dozens of cases where Murdaugh family members received minimal or no consequences for incidents that typically resulted in charges for others. This pattern reinforced what locals came to accept as an unspoken truth. There was one system of justice for the Murdaughs and another for everyone else. Perhaps most telling was how this power manifested in everyday interactions. As one Hampton resident who requested anonymity put it, "You didn't want to be on their bad side, period. That wasn't just paranoia, that was survival." Long before the shocking murders that would eventually expose the full extent of corruption within the Murdaugh dynasty, cracks had already begun to appear in the family's carefully maintained facade. The most public of these involved Alex's younger son, Paul Murdaugh, whose behavior had raised serious concerns throughout the community. In February 2019, Paul, then 19, hosted a party on the family's boat, consuming alcohol despite being underage. What began as a night of revelry ended in tragedy when Paul, allegedly intoxicated and at the helm, crashed the vessel into a bridge near Paris Island. The accident claimed the life of 19-year-old Mallory Beach, whose body wasn't recovered until a week later. That boat crash was the first real public challenge to the Murdaugh mystique, said Columbia-based investigative reporter Caitlin Morris. Suddenly, people were asking questions about whether the family was truly above the law. Despite witnesses stating Paul was visibly intoxicated and belligerent before the crash, his blood alcohol level was never tested at the scene. When he was eventually charged with boating under the influence causing death, many locals expressed skepticism about whether justice would truly be served. The Beach family's attorney, Mark Richardson, later stated in a deposition, "From the moment of the crash, it appeared the system was working to protect Paul Murdaugh, rather than determine the facts. Officers on scene were calling the Murdaugh family before fully processing the incident." This wasn't Paul's only troubling incident. Former classmates described a young man who seemed to believe rules didn't apply to him. There was always this understanding that Paul could do whatever he wanted. One former acquaintance told the Charleston Post and Courier, "If you grew up here, you knew not to cross a Murdaugh." Behind closed doors, tensions within the family had reportedly escalated. According to sources close to the Murdaughs, Alex's wife, Maggie, had consulted a divorce attorney in the months before her murder and expressed concerns about the family's finances. There were whispers of mounting pressure as the boat crash lawsuit threatened to expose the family's financial dealings. The veneer of respectability had begun to wear thin, revealing glimpses of a far more complicated reality beneath the surface of Murdaugh country. On the evening of June 7, 2021, a series of events unfolded that would forever alter the trajectory of the Murdaugh legacy. According to court documents, Alex Murdaugh called 911 at 10:07 p.m., his voice breaking, as he told dispatchers he had discovered the bodies of his wife Maggie, 52, and son Paul, 22, near the dog kennels on their sprawling 1,700-acre hunting property known as Moselle in Islandton, South Carolina. "I need the police and an ambulance immediately," Alex told the dispatcher in the recorded call. "My wife and child have been shot badly." When first responders arrived at the scene, they found a gruesome tableau. Paul had been killed by 2 shotgun blasts, one to the chest and another to the head. Maggie was found several feet away, shot multiple times with a rifle. Investigators would later determine she had been attempting to flee her attacker when she was struck down. Alex told investigators he had been visiting his ailing father, Randolph Murdaugh III, earlier that evening, and returned home to make this horrific discovery. According to his initial statements, he had last seen Maggie and Paul alive when they had dinner together around 8:15 p.m. Mr. Murdaugh stated he took a nap on the couch and then decided to check on his mother before driving to the kennels where he located the victims, read the police report filed that night by Colleton County Sheriff's Deputy Daniel Green. Cell phone evidence recovered from the scene would later contradict this timeline. Paul's phone contained a video taken at 8:45 p.m. near the kennels, and forensic analysis would eventually reveal 3 distinct voices in that recording: Paul's, Maggie's, and a third voice that witnesses would identify as Alex's. The initial police response was massive. Within hours, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLED, had taken over the investigation, deploying crime scene technicians, blood spatter experts, and ballistics specialists to the property. Officers cordoned off nearly a 1/4 mile of the estate with crime scene tape, working through the night under floodlights. "We're treating this as a double homicide," SLED Chief Mark Keel told reporters gathered at the end of the long driveway the following morning. "No suspects have been detained at this time, but we do not believe there is a broader threat to public safety." Conspicuously absent from early statements was any mention of possible motives, the lack of forced entry, the presence of valuable items left untouched, and the specific targeting of these 2 family members immediately raised questions among investigators about whether this was a random act of violence or something more personal. News of the murders spread through the Lowcountry like wildfire. By morning, residents of Hampton County and surrounding areas gathered in small groups outside local diners and shops, trying to process what had happened to one of their most prominent families. "I've known the Murdaughs all my life," said Marcia Hadwin, a longtime Hampton resident, to local reporters. "Nothing like this happens here. Not to people like them. It's just unthinkable." Within 24 hours, the family released a brief statement through their attorney, Jim Griffin. "The Murdaugh family has suffered unimaginable tragedy. We ask for your prayers as we mourn the loss of Maggie and Paul, whom we loved so deeply." Meanwhile, law enforcement maintained a heavy presence at Moselle. SLED agents conducted meticulous grid searches of the property, divers examined nearby ponds, and forensics teams collected shell casings, DNA samples, and other evidence. The agency remained tight-lipped about their findings. "We are pursuing all potential leads," said SLED spokesperson Tommy Crosby at a press briefing 3 days after the murders. "This is a complex investigation that requires time and thoroughness." What began as a community united in grief quickly gave way to whispers and speculation. At church gatherings and grocery store checkouts, locals questioned how someone could get onto the secured property, why there were apparently no signs of forced entry, and whether this tragedy connected to previous incidents involving the family. "Well, people are scared," Pastor Jeff Griffith told a Charleston news station. "When something this violent happens to a family this powerful, it makes you wonder if anyone is truly safe." As funeral arrangements were made, law enforcement continued to interview family members and associates. Alex Murdaugh sat for multiple interviews, maintaining his timeline of events, despite growing inconsistencies that investigators had begun to notice. John Meters, a former prosecutor familiar with the Murdaughs, observed to the state newspaper, "The mystery isn't just who did this, but why. In cases like this where prominent people are targeted so specifically, the motive often tells you everything." As the investigation intensified, the pristine image the Murdaughs had cultivated for generations began to crack under mounting scrutiny. What once seemed unquestionable, the family's integrity, their standing, their narrative of events, was now subject to harsh examination from both officials and a community in disbelief. Alex's alibi presented the first significant concern. He claimed to have been visiting his ailing father and mother around the time of the murders, returning to find his wife and son dead near the dog kennels. But inconsistencies emerged almost immediately. The timeline doesn't add up. A source close to the investigation leaked to the Post and Courier. There are gaps we cannot account for, and Mr. Murdaugh's cell phone data tells a different story than his statements. The investigation cast a shadow over the family's legal practice as well. Court documents that had previously gone unexamined were suddenly revisited. Cases the Murdaughs had won, settlements they had negotiated, and charges they had dismissed as prosecutors all faced renewed interest. The Murdaughs weren't just lawyers in Hampton County. They were the law, explained criminal justice professor Elaine Carmichael in a television interview. When that kind of concentrated power comes under suspicion, every action they've taken professionally becomes questionable by association. Local attitudes shifted with remarkable speed. The same community that had revered the Murdaugh name for a century now harbored doubts. At the Palmetto Cafe, where Alex had frequently held court over breakfast meetings, his usual table remained conspicuously empty. "People are talking differently now," said Betsy Williams, who had worked as a paralegal at a competing firm. "Things they would only whisper before, they're saying out loud. It's like the murders broke some spell over this town." Within weeks, law enforcement began examining the family's financial dealings with unprecedented intensity, including client trust accounts at the law firm and insurance policies on the deceased. The foundations of the Murdaugh legacy, once thought unshakable, had begun to tremble. The murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh would prove to be merely the beginning of a stunning cascade of revelations that would strip away the veneer of respectability from one of South Carolina's most powerful families. What began as a horrific double homicide investigation would soon expand into something far more complex and far-reaching than anyone could have anticipated. In the days following the murders, whispers began circulating through Hampton County. These whispers would soon grow into shouts as investigators uncovered a labyrinth of alleged financial crimes spanning decades. Millions of dollars missing from client settlements, embezzlement on a massive scale, a network of bank accounts designed to obscure the movement of funds. What we're seeing with the Murdaugh case is unprecedented. Former FBI investigator James Kelly would later tell reporters. The financial crimes alone would make this a significant case. But when combined with multiple deaths, you have something that defies easy categorization. Indeed, the deaths of Maggie and Paul would not be the only suspicious fatalities linked to the family. Investigators would soon revisit the mysterious roadside death of 19-year-old Stephen Smith in 2015, the suspicious drowning of the Murdaugh's longtime housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, in 2018, and a boat crash that killed teenager Mallory Beach, a crash in which Paul Murdaugh had been allegedly driving while intoxicated. As pressure mounted, Alex Murdaugh's behavior grew increasingly erratic. A bizarre roadside shooting, initially reported as an attempted murder against him, would later be exposed as an insurance fraud scheme, one of many desperate attempts to conceal the unraveling of his financial house of cards. The story of the Murdaughs is ultimately about power, how it's accumulated, how it corrupts, and how it eventually fails. It's about a family that operated above the law for generations until the weight of their secrets became too heavy to bear. As we'll explore in Chapter 2, the investigation would lead to a courtroom drama more shocking than any fictional legal thriller, as Alex Murdaugh, a man who once commanded the respect of judges and juries, found himself facing a very different kind of justice.